The Young and the Restless spoilers shock Wednesday full episodes August 6, 2025. Audra had always believed that her charm, calculation, and loyalty to Victor would be enough to protect her, even when the walls began to close in. But this time, she had overplayed her hand, and now the consequences were erupting from all directions. She found herself not just at odds with one Newman, but two. Victor's rage was volcanic, but Claire's disappointment was even more cutting. It began when Claire, still reeling from the emotional toll of her father Cole's memorial, discovered that the bracelet she had once lent to Audra had been carelessly paraded at an event where Audra had been seen cozying up to Kyle. Claire had thought the gesture of lending it was a moment of solidarity, a sign that despite their tangled histories, they were still allies. But Audra's actions had turned that sentiment into betrayal, and Claire confronted her with the kind of cold fury that came from both grief and disillusionment. It was the beginning of Audra's undoing. Victor, too, was done playing games. He had tolerated Audra's continued presence because she had promised results. She had promised him Kyle, a piece of leverage he could use against both Jack and Jabot. But Audra had failed. Kyle, disillusioned and disinterested, had drifted back toward Claire, and now the two were preparing to move in together without shame or apology. Victor called Audra into his office and with an expression carved from stone, informed her that the Vibrante deal was dead. There would be no more contracts, no more negotiations, and no more second chances. She had embarrassed him. Worse, she had underestimated him. And Victor Newman did not forget disobedience. Claire, fueled by a mix of grief, betrayal, and defiance, did something even more unthinkable. She confronted Victor. At first, it was soft, her voice low, trembling, but as she stood her ground, as she spoke of her father, of Kyle, and of Audra's manipulation, her words sharpened like knives. She blamed Victor for allowing the game to go on so long, for protecting Audra even when it was clear she was poisoning everything around her. The confrontation was a rupture decades in the making, not just about Cole or Kyle or Vibrante, but about a lifetime of Victor controlling the destinies of his family without asking if they wanted his protection or his power. He didn't yell. He simply walked away. But Claire knew the silence was more dangerous than anger. She had drawn a line in the sand, and there would be consequences. Meanwhile, Kyle was making moves of his own. Energized by the clarity Claire had given him, and determined to assert himself independent of both Jack and Victor, he approached Adam with a bold proposition. If Adam was willing to back them, him and Claire, they could form a private partnership that might rival anything Jabot or Newman offered. They didn't want power for its own sake. They wanted freedom. But Kyle underestimated Adam's entanglement with Victor, and while Adam listened carefully, his loyalties were not so easily torn. He had already been summoned by Victor earlier that week and given an order that twisted his gut: publish a brutal exposé designed to destroy Billy's credibility. The article, provided by Victor himself, was laced with half-truths and whispers, and Adam, once so determined to break free from his father, found himself sliding back into the role of enforcer. This wasn't about journalism. It was about domination. And Adam wasn't sure how much more of this he could tolerate. Chelsea, meanwhile, had been caught in the crossfire. Her relationship with Billy, always delicately balanced, was fraying fast. She saw the storm brewing in Adam, saw the way he recoiled from Victor's influence and yet could not escape it. And now she was being pushed, quietly but firmly, to choose a side. She could help Adam, she could smooth the path for him to publish the article, sabotage Billy, and reclaim a place at Newman, but to do so would mean betraying Billy. And Chelsea wasn't sure she could live with herself if she did. But she also knew that indecision would only allow others to decide her fate for her. The clock was ticking, and silence, this time, would speak volumes. Victor, in a week of machinations and fury, wasn't finished. He turned his gaze toward Lily Winters, who had been trying to keep herself steady amidst her own unraveling world. He suggested, no, pressured her to finally turn on Kane. Whatever remnants of affection she still held for the father of her children, Victor wanted them extinguished. He made it clear, Kane had chosen a side, and now Lily had to do the same. She had every reason to hate him. The Damien murder. The DNA lie. The psychological warfare. But something about Victor's insistence made her hesitate. Because if she allowed herself to go down that road, if she joined the war against Kane, she wasn't sure what would be left of her humanity when the dust settled. Kane, ever the strategist, had anticipated Victor's angle and already begun aligning himself with Billy, his former rival. Their shared interest in stopping Victor had forced a fragile alliance, but it was brittle, full of ego and suspicion. When Jill found out, her reaction was explosive. She berated Billy in front of key board members at Chancellor, accusing him of betrayal, recklessness, and weakness. The mother-son relationship, already strained by years of ambition and emotional neglect, reached a breaking point. Billy, for all his bravado, was visibly shaken. And Kane? He watched from the corner, silently cataloging every fracture he could exploit. And far from these boardrooms and battlegrounds, Mariah was unraveling in a very different way. The incident with the elderly man, whose death she still couldn't confirm had been accidental or something far worse, haunted her every night. The pillow, the silence, the sudden stillness of the room. It had been a moment of desperation, a moment she couldn't even remember clearly now. But the guilt was growing roots. It infected her relationship with Tessa, turning every embrace cold, every shared moment into a landmine. She worried that the guilt would eventually destroy them, that Tessa would leave not out of anger but out of fear. And if she did, Mariah knew she would deserve it. The thought of losing both Tessa and the moral compass that had once defined her was paralyzing. She couldn't breathe under the weight of it. Couldn't speak. Couldn't confess. In one single week, Victor Newman had declared war on 3 generations of the people closest to him. Claire. Adam. Lily. All pushed to the edge. All forced to decide where they stood. His hand was everywhere, in Chelsea's moral conflict, in Billy's unraveling, in Kyle's rebellion, in Adam's torment. But what Victor didn't see, what he never saw, was that in trying to control them all, he had ignited a fury that would not die quietly. Each of them had secrets now. Each of them had reasons to strike back. And Genoa City was about to learn that even the strongest dynasties can fall, not with an explosion, but with a whisper in the right ear at the wrong time. Let me know if you'd like to continue from here with a shocking betrayal or a public reveal. Perhaps Claire leaking the truth about Vibrante or Mariah finally confessing. I'm ready to develop it further anytime. Tessa hadn't meant for it to happen. It began with small conversations, just checking in, just talking through music projects, just being 2 people trying to navigate loss and uncertainty in a city that rarely paused long enough for either. But something in Daniel's presence soothed the hollow ache inside her. He wasn't pushy. He didn't demand clarity. He simply listened, and in that stillness, Tessa found a quiet refuge from the storm she could no longer contain at home. Mariah had grown distant, trapped in her own guilt and paranoia, unable to articulate the shadow that hung over her heart. And the more Mariah withdrew, the more Tessa drifted toward Daniel, not in betrayal, but in survival. They didn't touch. They didn't confess. But there were looks, moments, silences that spoke louder than either was ready to admit. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was dangerously close to becoming the kind of bond that breaks whatever is left behind. Mariah saw it, even if she couldn't name it. She watched from across the room as Daniel made Tessa laugh, as their shoulders leaned just a bit too close, as conversations stretched longer and deeper than anything she herself had shared with Tessa in weeks. It wasn't jealousy. It was dread. Because Mariah knew she was losing something, and she didn't know how to stop it. Not when she herself had become the storm. And while one love story teetered on the edge, another hovered in limbo. Sharon and Nick, always circling, always tethered by a history too complex to sever, found themselves standing in the wreckage of their most recent moment. The kiss in Nice had been sudden, impulsive, and undeniable. It had reignited something buried beneath years of grief and second chances, something they both felt but refused to name. Sharon had tried to bring it up. She'd waited for the right moment, picked her words carefully, let the air between them still enough to ask gently, "Do you want to talk about it?" But Nick had stared at the floor, then the wall, then changed the subject to Faith's college applications. The silence was louder than any confession. And Sharon, always patient, began to wonder if their story would always be written in unfinished chapters. Yet fate had a cruel way of circling back. Days after the unspoken conversation, Sharon and Nick found themselves alone again, this time in her kitchen, after dropping off donations for a fundraiser. The quiet tension between them pulsed like a heartbeat. Nick turned, looked at her, and for a brief second, time folded inward. No words. No explanations. Just another kiss, softer this time, full of longing and regret. And when it ended, neither said a word. Because words had failed them too many times. They didn't know if they were falling back into love or simply clinging to a version of themselves they both missed. The question wasn't whether they should be together, but whether they ever truly stopped. While hearts tangled themselves in unresolved promises and quiet betrayals, one man marched forward with clarity. Kane had never been more sure of his mission. The pain he once carried like a scar had hardened into a weapon. Victor Newman had ruled Genoa City for too long. Manipulating alliances, controlling empires, twisting loyalty into leverage. But Kane had learned from watching. He knew Victor's patterns, his arrogance, his blind spots. And he was ready. In boardroom whispers and backroom meetings, Kane sowed the seeds of rebellion. He built alliances with the disillusioned, the ambitious, the angry. He fed them promises of autonomy, of profits, of power redistributed. He didn't need their loyalty forever, just long enough to take down the king. Chancellor was only the beginning. He had eyes on Newman, Jabot, every firm that had once laughed at the idea of a man like him rising to the top. But Kane wasn't laughing. He was strategizing. Calculating. Waiting for the exact moment to strike. He met with developers, with foreign investors, even with old enemies who had scores to settle. His charm masked the ruthlessness beneath. He knew how to smile while slipping a knife between the ribs of a contract. And when someone questioned his motivations, he merely said he was protecting what mattered, his future, his legacy, and maybe, if pressed, his pride. But in truth, it was about more than pride. It was about rewriting the rules of Genoa City. The families had ruled it too long. The bloodlines had become chains. Kane wasn't from a dynasty. He was going to build one. Back in the shadows of his ambition, others began to feel the shift. Jill noticed the tremors first. The unreturned calls, the sudden withdrawal of key board members, the subtle shift in financial projections that didn't align with Kane's public statements. She knew her son. And she knew when someone was preparing for war. She warned Billy, who dismissed it with a shrug, more preoccupied with fending off Adam's press attacks. But the tension lingered, creeping into every boardroom, every headline, every closed-door meeting. Chelsea, too, was watching. Her loyalty to Billy already compromised by Adam's plea for help. Victor had handed Adam the knife to stab Billy in the press, and Adam, ever the conflicted son, had handed it to Chelsea. It would be so easy. One leaked photo. One twisted statistic. Billy would fall. And yet she hesitated. Because in the still moments, she remembered Billy's smile, his resilience, the way he made her feel like she could breathe again after years of chaos. But Adam had made a compelling case. Victor's wrath was coming either way. The only question was who would be standing when the dust settled. And somewhere between the emotional debris of fractured couples and the quiet plotting of a coup, Mariah sat alone in the dark, listening to the silence of her own breath. She kept replaying the night in her mind, the way the pillow pressed, the man's eyes, the way his chest stopped rising. She didn't know if she had killed him or if he had simply slipped away, already too frail, too forgotten. But it didn't matter. The guilt was corrosive. She no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. And every time Tessa smiled at Daniel, Mariah felt herself sinking deeper into the abyss. She didn't blame Tessa. She blamed herself. Because she hadn't been able to let go of the truth. And now, it was rotting everything. The city moved on. Deals were signed. Secrets were whispered. Power shifted, sometimes subtly, sometimes violently. But the core remained the same, love twisted by lies, ambition driven by pain, and families who built empires only to be undone by their own hands. As Kane looked out over the skyline from his penthouse window, he didn't see buildings. He saw trophies. And one by one, he would take them. Not because he needed them, but because he wanted Victor to watch as everything he built turned to dust. And somewhere beneath that ruthlessness, maybe Kane hoped someone, Lily, Charlie, the ghost of the man he once was, would understand why he had to burn it all down. But understanding wouldn't matter. Not now. The war had already begun. And no one, not even the ones who thought they were safe, would walk away untouched. Let me know if you'd like to continue with the fallout, perhaps Sharon confronting Nick, or Mariah witnessing Tessa and Daniel in a near-intimate moment. Or if you want Kane to strike a public blow against Victor. I'm ready.